In this video, I'll go through a couple more examples of constructing confidence intervals in Minitab and then writing out a conclusion for it. So here's our first one. So we've got this IQ scores for students at a university, and we've got the mean IQ score from the sample and the standard deviation of 18.6, and we want to find a 95% confidence interval. So first off, I want you to note the wording here. It said a sample showed a mean of this and a standard deviation of this. That means the standard deviation we're given is for the sample, not for a whole population. I'll be very careful with my wording so that if I am giving you a population standard deviation, I either use the word population or say the standard deviation of all students' IQ scores or something like that. So here we're talking about a sample standard deviation. And my question here is IQ scores are standardized, right? We've got this fact that they have a standard deviation of 15. Should we use that fact here? So I'll give you a reason why we might want to and a reason why we really shouldn't. The reason why we might want to is that that would enable us to make a Z confidence interval using a normal distribution that will always make a narrower interval than the T interval. So if we used the fact that we know this population standard deviation, then we could make a narrower confidence interval, which is pretty much always something we want, right? That means we've got a smaller margin of error. We have a more precise estimate of things. So that would be why we might want to use that. Why shouldn't we, though? Well, fundamentally speaking, when we take a sample, we're taking it, we're trying to get a representative set of observations from a population. When I take a sample that's only university students are really not a representative sample of all people, right? I think there's many reasons why that is, but just to be realistic here, a lot of those very lowest IQ scores probably wouldn't make it to a full university, or some other issues here. But since this is not our sample was only taken from a university, that's not representative of the population at large. I really can't use a population level statistic that's not for the population that I'm sampling from. Right? If we go back to our first week definitions of what samples and populations are, our sample here is 100 university students, which means our population that we drew from was just university students. And I should not be using population parameters for a different population, which is all Americans or all people that take IQ tests that year. So I really can't use the standard deviation of 15. I need to use the sample standard deviation of 18.6, which means I'll be doing a T interval instead of a Z. And let me just quickly reiterate why that is. The choice that I make between a Z and T is purely based on whether I am using a population standard deviation. Here, I do not know the population standard deviation for IQ scores of university students, so I need to use the sample standard deviation, which means I need to use a T interval. All right, so let me switch over to Minitab. To make a T interval, we just go to Stat, Basic Statistics, and one sample T. So these Z and T confidence intervals are right next to each other. We just need to remember which one is which. So I'll use the one sample T, and again, I don't have raw data. That's what this would be about. I have summarized data. So I have a sample size of 100 students. The sample mean for those 100 students is 112 with a standard deviation of 18.6. So put 112 for the mean and 18.6 for my standard deviation. And I wanted to construct a 95% confidence interval. Note that 95 is kind of the default because realistically in real life it's usually the default anyway. So we'll just click OK. And I get my confidence interval right here. It goes from 108.3 to 115.7. So let me give you an example of how I might write that out. Okay. With 95% confidence, the true mean IQ score for university students is between, sorry, I gotta flip back to Minitab to see this. It's between 108.3 and 115.7. And I don't think there's any units that I need to put on here for IQ scores. So again, I've listed my confidence level. I said what it is I estimated, the mean IQ score for university students, and then I gave my confidence interval itself. And usually I would need to put units, but here I don't know that there's really units for IQ scores. So that's how I'd get a T confidence interval constructed in Minitab, and how I would want to report something like that.